Okay, hello again. So we're going to talk today about another area of writing algorithms. That's the idea of a pseudocode. Okay, code meaning obviously code, and pseudo mean type of. Okay, so if you have to write an algorithm into your exam, for example, pseudocode is a great way to give you the answer. Okay, you don't have to worry about fiddly bits of syntax from a specific programming language. This is a general all-purpose way of kind of writing it. Okay, so obviously we know that at this stage the algorithms are just a set of instructions for solving the problems, but in real life, pseudocode is a kind of more concise way rather than try and formalize it in some type of high-end language like Python or something like that. It's an easier way of doing it. Okay, so obviously let's go through the basics. So from now on, I'm just going to use big P, small s for pseudocode. Okay, so pseudocode, okay, pseudocode is not a programming language. It's just not. Okay, but it should, and this is important, really important, follow a similar structure to a programming language. In other words, line by line, if you're going to use an indent, have an indent, that type of thing, okay? And it should roughly read like one, okay? So what we will do is we'll have a look at some of them. Okay, it should be quick. What should it be? Well, it should be quick and easy to write, okay? But the most important thing, the reader, the person who's going to read your pseudocode should understand it. So this is a critical bit, okay? Whether you're an expert in Python or Java or C++ or, JavaScript, or it doesn't make a difference. The pseudocode should be able to be interpreted by all those different language users. Even though it mightn't be specific to one language, it should look familiar enough that you'd be able to interpret it, okay? So listen, let's just do a quick example. So maybe it'll just help you kind of understand this a little bit better. So let's have a scenario. Let's say I want to write an algorithm that calculates your pay after 20% pay rise. Okay, so you could do this in maths in about 10 seconds, but let's do it two different ways. Let's do a very simple way and then do it a kind of more formalized pseudocode way. So if I was to ask you as a person, how would you do that? Well, what would you do? You would take the salary, so take the pay, take original pay, ORIGIN, take your original pay. And what would you do? How would you increase it by 20%? Multiply it by, and this is where you use your bit of maths, 1.2, and then show me the answer. So let's think about it. Take the original pay. So let's say we'll have a person who's earning 200 quid a week. So take the original pay, 200. There it is. Multiply it by 1.2. 200 by 1.2. Okay. So basically you're getting 20%. That's 40 euro. Show me the answer, 240. And there you have it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine pseudocode. Okay. It's perfectly adequate. Okay. You've split it down into steps, and it's obvious to the person like me how to actually do the sum. Okay. However, it might be useful to actually, if you're going to code it, have more information there. Okay. So you could have, for example, this this would be personally what you should be doing in terms of pseudocode. Okay, take the original pay. Well, you have to declare what the original pay is. Is it an integer? Is it a string? What is it? So maybe integer pay. Okay, so you're declaring it as a pay. Now, depending on what language you have, you'd have a different way of telling the language that this thing, that pay, is an integer or whatever it is. Okay, and then you could just say pay, or then you equals, input, put in your original pay, something like that. And then what we're going to do, new pay equals, pay multiplied by 1.1. And again, depending on the language, that could be a star, could be whatever. But, and if you're going to be doing it in Python, there's no harm in putting a little bit of Python in there. Okay, new pay is that. And then what are we going to do? Return or print new pay. Now, you can see there that it looks kind of Python-y. It's not 100% Python-y, but it does look Python-y. But any language, any person in any language, so long as they understand any type of programming language, would know exactly what you're telling it to do there. Now, there's nothing different between those two, except this gives you more structure when you do go to a programming language. Hence the reason why it's a better type of pseudocode than that one. Okay? It's not vague, it's giving you enough information, and it's also giving you little pointers as to what to do next. Okay? And that is the important thing about it. You have to be able to give those pointers to the person who's going to read it to know where to go with it. So, when you're doing your project work, or when you're doing anything, there's no harm in having pseudocode. For those of you doing your Leave Insert project, you should be using pseudocode before you use real code. So at least you have an idea. Now, sometimes you don't have to use it in this form. You can use it in the form that I'll show you in the next video, which in the form of like flow diagrams or something like that, because I might make it a big, but you should have it in some way that gives you a skeleton on which to put the flesh that is the real high-level language on it. Okay, so let's have a little bit more of an in-depth look at some of the pseudocode. Sorry now. So even though it's not a formal language, it needs to be readable. Okay, so what we're going to look at is like what we need it to be. We need to be readable. It's easy enough to do. We need it to be easy to interpret. And most importantly, not vague. So what I mean by readable is, it should be in plain English, small words, not big words, words that are not, there's no argument over what that word means. Easy to interpret means it should be logically put out so that nobody's guessing, well, does this go in front of that? Does that go in front of this? And not too vague. In other words, don't be making it all wishy-washy. Don't be saying, oh, do this with it, when you really need to show them what you really want to do with it. So let's have a look at another example. Let's have a look at a password pseudocode. Just for the fun of it, okay? So listen, a user, let's think about it. 6 characters must, a simple one, okay? We need a 6-character password. And we need to check. So that's our criteria, that it is 6 characters, okay? So let's think of the pseudocode that we would need for this, okay? And check, let's make it a bit harder. Let's say we need to check that the password isn't the username. Password user. That's a good one. Okay, so let's try this one. Let's try and create the pseudocode. So what are we going to do? We need to first check your username. So let's create an input. Okay, so let's say username equals, and all we're going to tell it is, input username. So that's our pseudocode. Okay, so we've got something stored. We've got a username stored. Now we need to get a password in. Same thing again, input password. Now, how are we going to, in terms of pseudocode, what are we going to have to check? Just in plain English, and then we'll just try and put it. We need to say, if, first of all, we need to check that it's 6, okay? If the length of the password is less than or equal to 6, well, then what are we going to do? Then you need to print, I need 6 characters. Okay, simple as that. This is not formal Python. This is just spitballing it out. And then what are you going to say then? Else, well then if password, and again, this is not formal password, is equal to username, then, well, we need to print, you can't use same word for both. And then you get the idea what's going to be next then. Okay. So I'm just going to shift it up a little bit. It's okay with G. Yeah. Okay. So you can't have it the same length, and then else, if it's okay, if it's that, else, whatever, print password okay. And then we need to do something at the end, don't we? We need to, end your program. Now, depending on the type of language you use, ending program could be stopped right there. Or if you're using JavaScript, you might have to put those little squiggly brackets. Okay, so it all depends on what you're going to use. Okay, let's have a quick gander at some of these bits. These different color here now, if you don't mind. Okay, so what's the use? Again, this can come up. So we're just going to line 1, line 2. Okay, I'm going to pop that in for 3. That line there is 4. This one's 5. And this one's 6. What's happening at 1? Okay, so what's on line 1? What have you been asked to do? Okay, so we're looking at an input and a variable, aren't we? That's what's happening. We've got an input gone in and it's been stored as a variable. Okay, what's happening at, let's say, line 2? Or sorry, in 2, you've also got an input and a variable. Okay, line 3. What's happening with print? I need 6 characters. Okay, well, you're getting an output based on a conditional, aren't you? If it's less, then print that. If it's more, then you're getting a conditional there on line 3. The output is based on the conditional that it's nested inside of. Okay, line 4 then, print, you can use the same word for both. Okay, isn't that the same thing? You get an output based on a conditional. Now, what's happening in line 5? Okay, if the length, so it's an if statement. Okay, so, and what's happening in line 6? So line 5, this color, line 5 and line 6 are the if statements. And then inside the if statements, you've got your activation, for want of a better word. Okay, so this is what pseudocode really is. When we talk about it all the time, it's a very simple idea, okay? But interpreting what's going on at each stage in a pseudocode is very, very important. Okay, it doesn't make a difference what language you learn. Remember, your language of preference is going to be Python, but they could put this equally in JavaScript, because if it's, remember, readable, easy to interpret, and not vague, no matter what language you learn, you should still be able to interpret it. Okay, that's the whole point of it. Right, so in tomorrow's video, I am going to have a look at how we can visualize pseudocode, which is a pretty important concept. And it's probably the one that's caused the most trouble in terms of students being able to kind of move from one to the other. How do you interpret it? And what we'll do is we can come back and look at this code and see how we would turn this code into a visualization. In other words, a flow diagram. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.